Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, for the introduction. Good morning. This is my second time to participate in this Sino-American Symposium on clinical and translational medicine. The first time that I attended was 6 years ago in Shanghai, and at that particular time I was participating as a practicing scientist. But this morning I'm going to switch my role and I'm going to talk to you as an administrator in the capacity of as the chairman of the Chang Medical Research and Development Board, which oversees all the research activities in the whole organization, and as the director of the Institute for Translational Research in Biomedicine. Now, most of you have heard the role of the government or the private enterprises in promoting translational medicine, and what I would like to do this morning is to use the Chang Memorial Hospital experience to tell you a little bit about how the core value of a private foundation can provide funding in the development of translational medicine. So let me start by telling you a little bit about the Chang Medical Foundation. Most of you in the audience from China will heard of Chang system in the term of Tsinghua Chang Hospital in Beijing. Now, Chang Medical Foundation was actually established, actually exactly 40 years ago by Mr. Wang Yongqing, the founder of Formosa Plastic Group, in honor or in memory of his father. Chang Wang is the name of the father of Mr. Wang. And the original idea is that it's going to set up a hospital to become a provider of health services and that advocate for public welfare based not on revenue prerequisites. So our organization is a not-for-profit organization. So it actually starts at a very, very small hospital in 1976 in Taipei, which is an outpatient clinic. And then in 1978, there's a huge medical center that was established in the northern part of Linkou. If you've ever been in Taiwan, that's actually near the airport. And then there's another one in the northern port of Keelung, and then it went south to Kaohsiung in 1986, and then 2 more subsequently. So the whole organization is actually made up of 6 hospitals. To give you some statistics, of all this, we have a total of something like 34,100 physicians, 11,000 paramedical staff. We have a total of something close to 10,000 beds, and then our outpatient service will take care of 10 million patients per year. So it's a pretty big hospital. But one of the most fundamental philosophy of this hospital is that it actually has 3 missions. Primarily to serve the patients, and then to educate the medical practitioners, and then to explore. It is the last part of the mission that I'm involved in our organization. And research, right from the beginning, has always been an integral part of the Chang Medical Hospital. And what we did is we actually devoted 3% of our gross income every year into research, and considering the mass of income that we're coming out from the patients, then this is a huge amount of money. And to encourage people to seek external funding, we also institute a 50% matching fund. So for every dollar that people get from outside funding agency, we actually supplement 50 cents. So this is a huge encouragement. And to give you some idea of the expenditure that we use every year, for the last 5 years, in 2011, we actually devoted about $90 million into research investment, and this is strictly on research investment. All the acquirement of the equipment is actually extra. And it actually grows by about 50% to last year, we actually spent $135 million in research. It gives you some of the usual gauges for research productivity. 5 years ago, the whole organization published about 1,600 papers, and then it grew to about more than 2,000. And then the citation rate actually grew by 50%, just like the amount of investments and so forth. But one of the most unique philosophies in this organization is the decision process on research management, which I'm involved very intimately. In most organizations, when you talk about research projects, you are worried about how much it's going to cost. But in our organization, this is not the first question we ask. The first question we ask is it worth doing? If it's worth doing, then we then talk about how much money does it cost. So in other words, it's a saying in our organization, if it's a worthwhile project, money is not an issue. So this is the philosophy of this organization. And it's based on this philosophy that at the beginning of this century, we begin to ask a very strange, interesting question, and that is, can we in the Chang Medical Memorial Hospital do something different in terms of research? And I was charged to undertake this task. It took quite a long time to discuss with various people, but by the time when Dr. Suhani announced the idea of translational research in 2003, and by 2005, I was invited by my very good friend, Dr. Thomas Carter, to edit a monograph for him, which we call Translational Research in Biomedicine. And this idea becomes very, very clear that we want to do something to create a model on how translational research should be carried out in a medical center. Remember, this is in the earlier days of translational medicine. So we heard over the years, and also as explained by Professor Wang just a while ago, there's a transition of what translational medicine is all about. And one of the arguments is whether it should be from bench to bedside or from bedside to bench or back and forth. So the whole idea then boils down to two very personal views of my own on translational medicine. And one of the first views that I have on translational medicine is something like this. Now, if we subscribe to the philosophical connotation, the medical research is for the betterment of humankind, then there should really be no real demarcation between clinical, or so-called bedside, and preclinical, or the bench research. Why? And that is because the only difference in those studies is the subject. If you use human subjects, we call it bedside study. If you use animals with tissues or cells, we call it bench topics. But all of them are governed by the same ethical principles and guidelines, and all we review some information on some aspect of biomedicine. So, to me, there is no such thing as preclinical or clinical study or bench or bedside study. So translational medicine, I interpret it as a discipline that transcends the boundaries between bench and bedside research, and it is the synthesis of ideas, technologies, and research outcomes that are associated with a particular health theme. So in short, my first view on translational medicine is a solution, and a solution to health problems. It could start anywhere in these three circles. You can start with a clinical problem that all the physicians observe every day in the clinics, or you can observe in the laboratories by the basic scientists, or you can actually came out from clinical trials where we see side effects. So all of these are actually interchangeable, and in the end, we're actually looking at the same thing. We're going to solve a health problem. Now, my other view on translational medicine is something very, very interesting, and it is translational comes from the word translation. Translation to most people is defined as the expression of words in another language, Chinese to English, English to Japanese. But if you look at the more advanced dictionaries, well, nobody reads dictionaries anymore. But if you look at Oxford Dictionary, there's another interpretation of translation, and that is it encompasses expression in simple languages and uncomplicated interpretations. So in terms of translational medicine, my view is that translational medicine is the presentation of knowledge gathered in a fashion that is accessible to non-experts, be they laboratory scientists or clinical practitioner. To a PhD scientist, if you talk to him about myocardial infarction, he is a non-expert. He might be a first-class molecular biologist, but he knows absolutely nothing about myocardial infarction. So he is a non-expert. On the other hand, if you talk about cardiology by molecular images, then basically he is also a non-expert. So what we do is translational medicine is about communication. Communication between all the clinical scientists and the laboratory scientists. So it's based on those two views that I propose to build a center for translational research in biomedical sciences in around the year of 2005. And the first center was actually built in the Kaohsiung campus, and it actually occupies one floor in the hospital. And at that particular time, I was given a startup equipment grant of $17 million US dollars. Why do we pick Kaohsiung instead of Kaohsiung? Actually is the second largest medical center in our organization, so it is the right size. It is not as big as the one in the north, but it has enough people to do what we want to do. So, and more importantly, I lived in Kaohsiung, so that's one of the reasons. So here is a glimpse of, we occupied the 11th floor of Children's Hospital, and Tim was about the only one in the audience who visited us. And the aspiration, as I said at the beginning, is to set an example on how translational research in a medical center should be carried out, and of course at the end we want it to be of international repute. Now the important philosophy is this: we want people to work together. So here the philosophy is we want the clinical and the laboratory scientists to work together. And in our organization, if you work in a medical center or in medical school, there's always an argument whether MDs are better than the PhDs or PhDs are better than MDs. But in our center, there's no such thing. And nobody works for nobody. But everybody works with everybody, and everybody educates everybody. And that's the idea of communication. And in the end, we have together everybody was growing. So the goal for the center is to provide a congenial environment where the clinical and the laboratory scientists can interact freely in terms of clinically relevant research problems and solutions. The key point here is everything we do has to be clinically relevant because we're supported by money that from the hospital. So what we do is we want to set up an environment where people would address meaningful research problems and generate solutions without the worry of whether they have the facilities or they have know-how. If this is some MD scientist wanting to do molecular mechanism, he would worry about, do I have this, do I have that, do I know how to do it? And that is actually provided for them. Now, for the PhD scientists, when they want to do something and they want to know the clinical relevance of it, we also provide inputs from the clinical scientists as well. So by joining together and working together and look for meaningful research problems and generating meaningful solutions, we are trying to create a win-win situation for everybody. Now, one of the strategies, and one of the things that I feel very, very glad that I'm working in this organization is that, as I said, money is not an issue here. So what we do right from the beginning, this is a very, very revolutionary idea of it. When we start the center, we actually bought literally every, almost the state-of-the-art facilities in the center. In order to acquire the equipment right from the beginning, and we hire the technical support to run those facilities. So if you want to do work on the genes, you want on tissues, you want to work on molecules, and if you want to work on animals, we have one of the largest molecular imaging for animal work in Taiwan and possibly in Asia. It's all that. But then the most important thing is we provide scientific advice. The PhD scientists will advise the MD scientists on how to work on mechanistic studies, and the clinicians will tell them whether the model that is set up is relevant to the patient. So it's very, very important with the balance. Another strategy we actually use an open laboratory philosophy, and that nobody has their own laboratory. Everybody works together, and this actually encourages interactions between everybody. When you have your little room and you have your little group, you don't talk to your neighbors. When you're working with somebody side by side, you start to talking, you start to generate new ideas. So a third way to do it is when we implement our instrument, we try to purchase instruments that are actually compatible between the clinical side and the laboratory side. Let me give you two examples of that. When we set up our ultrasonograph, this is a sonograph, a strange imaging that we take for all our patients. This is the presentation that a physician will look at. It's a radio strain or a circumferential strain. When we bought our equipment, which is the equivalent of an animal ultrasound, this is the presentation we have. It's almost exactly like the clinical presentation. So when somebody was generating an animal model for heart disease, you actually look at the animals and you can look at it. It's very likely that you're exactly like you're looking at the patient. So this is the way we actually cross the bridge between the clinical studies and the laboratory studies. In the setting of animal MRI facilities, we have in our own center the 9.4 Tesla animal MRI. Now, in Taiwan, as in many parts of the world, for human studies, because of the health issues, the highest magnitude you get is a 3 Tesla. So which means it has much less resolution. But we can actually complement it by a higher resolution study. And then we can actually look into more detailed studies into the rat and in the mouse. Now, one of the things that we're very proud of, we're actually one of the very first people to actually look at the medulla oblongata of a mouse, which is something like 2 or 3 mm. This is a very small area, and we can now able to dissect a very small part of the medulla oblongata in the mouse and really look at circuits, and by diffusion tensor imaging, we're actually being able to look at very, very small neural circuits that are actually happening in the brainstem. So it's a very, very exciting thing. And then we can actually use it to solve a clinical problem. I just want to take 2 minutes to give you an example. Many years ago, we actually identified a signal that we can detect from the blood pressure of a patient. And here is an example of a patient who has been declared brain dead. And this signal, which we call a life and death signal, is actually gone. So when this signal disappears of the blood pressure, despite a very reasonable blood pressure, the patient is going on a way of no return. And nobody knows why is this doing it. So now we are actually applying this into our animal models to solve a problem. Why is the life and death signal? I'm not going to bother you with the details, but here I just want to tell you that here's an animal where the activity of the animals begins to slow down. If we look at the blood pressure actually is dropping, but it's not going down. But at a particular time when this life and death signal is gone, and this is the time when we actually look at our patients with reasonable blood pressure, which means that this animal is having the equivalent of brain death in a patient. If you look at the heart rate actually stops much later. It is only at this particular time. So we don't know why this is happening, but when we apply imaging the mouse, then we can see at the beginning, you can actually see the green signals there, and these are the life and death signals. And actually the circuits are very, very prominent, but over time, if you look at the yellow arrows, then over time, it begins to drop, and then at the end is dropped. So one of the reasons now that the life and death signal is gone is because the neural circuit has been disrupted. And this is the kind of thing that we do in the center. Another strategy that we use is we want to infuse a sense of belonging. Now, people will not come to you because of the facilities, but they have no homage to the center, and that's not good. So we want everybody to have a sense of belonging by doing one thing. We provide the hardware, but we do not provide the software. So they have to bring in their own money, bring in their own technicians, and then they want to have external funding. but more so, we want them to do a collaboration, and then most of the people in the center are actually working together. If it's a clinical scientist, they work with a laboratory scientist and vice versa. So we actually have a very strong complement of people, full-time people. I have in the center 11 PhD scientists, and then but we have a large complement of MD scientists that we work together. So right now it's something like about 100 people in the center. We're doing pretty good. During the last 6 years, we generated about $11 million funding, which is about 50% above the national average in Taiwan. And last year, we got $2 billion, but more important thing is we were able to generate some publication. The publication is really not what we worry about. What we worry about is how would this outcome help the patient. So here, give you an example of one of my favorite colleagues, Professor Yip, who is an interventional cardiologist. He's one of the STEM people in Taiwan. So 10 years ago, he told me that he wanted to work on stem cells, and then so he created an animal model on diffuse coronary artery diseases, and then do all the fundamental work from mouse to rat to pig, and then about 5 years ago, he actually received the very first approval to try stem cells on humans. So earlier this year, we just finished his study. This is a long title, but basically what he does is he actually brings isolates CD34 cells from patients who are not able to receive coronary intervention. So actually isolate the stem cells and then infuse it back to the patient through the coronary artery. And the results are fantastic. You can see 3 patients before and after. You can see the growth of the arteries in the heart. But more importantly, we're actually seeing improvement of the heart functions. So we just finished phase 1 study. We're going to phase 2 now on this particular area. So this is the very first stem cell trial in Taiwan. And then because of this achievement, we just received approval to do allogeneic umbilical mesenchymal stem cell trials on 3 groups of patients: on shock, stroke patients, septic shock, and acute respiratory disease, depressed syndrome. So here, these are the things that are actually making me excited because we're actually benefiting the patients directly. And this, I think, is what the translational research is all about. And because of this STEM work, and then we are now also linking with Professor John Fraser in Australia. Professor John Fraser is a world-class expert on accessory devices for cardiac and respiratory diseases. So he visited us about at the end of 2015, and then right away we linked up stem cell work with his device work. And with the blessing of this gentleman in the middle, he is actually the governor of Queensland. So in February, I visited them, and with his blessing, we actually had a joint project between Queensland and Taiwan. Queensland government started $250,000 Australian to start up an organization, match $500,000, and John just received $1.3 million grant from it, and I'm waiting for the results of my application from the government, which amounts to about $5 million. So these are exciting times for this kind of collaboration. But the basic idea then, ladies and gentlemen, is that I wish to use this opportunity to tell you the story of how we create a model in the form of Institute for Translational Research in Medicine to show our way of how translational medicine should be done. So how does it affect the whole organization? As I said, this was set up as a model 6 years ago, and now our bosses are very happy. So for the whole organization, we are actually currently building a research building, a 14-story building at the cost of $100 million to in the northern campus that actually house all the disciplines and put everybody together in 14 stories. In preparation for our work, all the major medical centers and organizations are ALAC accredited. In Taiwan, ALAC accreditation, not unlike America, is not required. But we are the only organization in Taiwan who is doing that. In preparation for our clinical work, 2 years ago we set up 2 clinical trial centers, one in the north, one in the south. And if you're interested in new technology for cancer research, our organization is actually having the very first and second proton center in Taiwan. The last 2 items actually cost us upwards of $1 billion. So this is the kind of spirit that the organization is doing. But I would like to leave you with one of my own observations. And for me, despite all these wonderful ways to spend money, to me, medical research fundamentally is really for the betterment of humankind. Now, over the years, we talk about things of publication, high impact journals, in patents, in technology transfer, in commercialization. To me, all these are actually side products of translational medicine. Really, the impact to me, translational medicine, ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Chairman, is for the betterment of humankind. Thank you very much.